Welcome, everyone. My name is Dana White, and welcome to the Myth Salon. Here we are, about a year and a half now into a pandemic that it seems to be picking up speed again. We passed the 700,000 death mark. It is just teaching us how and how not to live with the natural world, how to live with one another. And we all don't seem to be on the same page in terms of how we're moving forward. And I'm deeply affected by any number of situations that are happening in the culture. But it teaches us about life and death. So I would like just a moment now for us to reflect upon the conditions that are defining the waters in which we are all swimming. So let's have a moment of silence to open it up. Today, we have the really good fortune and honor to have our good friend, Dr. Connie Zweig, speak to us about aging. The thing about aging is that it really is a reality for those who are living. And for our poem today, I thought about doing Dylan Thomas's poem, Rage Against the Dying of the Light. And I asked Dennis for some recommendations, but I decided to go with verse 50 of the Tao Te Ching, which is life and death. So I thought I would read it for a moment. So bear with me, please. Whatever dies crosses the threshold into the eternity of all being. Whatever lives moves upon the path towards death. Death and non-death coexist as part of existence as well. Life and non-life are inseparable throughout existence. Yet non-life is not death, and non-death is not life. One who makes peace with life awaits death with equanimity. One who makes peace with death is free to live life with equanimity. Being one with existence yields equanimity. A third of us chase life, pushing death away however possible. A third of us pursue death, pushing life to the limit. A third of us simply pass through life, no heart, no mind. In the end, no matter what the story, everyone dies. The sage gives herself up to whatever moments bring. Without illusions or pretense, she holds nothing back. Filled with truths, she harvests from the Tao. Her footprints vanish the moment she takes the next step. Everything begins to die at the moment of birth. Time slips into eternity the moment death makes it one of the 10,000 things. In step with the Tao, the sage sees death everywhere through change. She who truly inhabits deathless life travels the land wearing no armor and bearing no arms in conflict. She never meets the rhino or tiger. She lives and dies one moment at a time. Immune from harnessing forces of fear and desire, she glides effortlessly toward the time when her existence will return her to a new beginning, knowing she is always where she needs to be. As the expression of the Tao, she becomes action, doing nothing, no more than a song with a beginning, middle, and end, a simple piece of harmony, like a wave breaking on the shore, beyond all circumstance, where neither rhino nor tiger can touch her. In death, the skin of the sage is smooth. So with that, I would like to turn it over to my very good friend and colleague, Dr. Will Linn, with whom together we started this Myth Salon 5 years ago, and with whom this group of panelists, we've been doing this now for coming up on 2 years now online. No one thought we'd be here that long. All right, my brother, Will.
Thanks, Dana. You know, it's I know the odd thing about this being an event on age, and I know I'm the young guy in the room about to moderate a conversation on age. So I thought I'd start by humbly saying that I don't know anything about aging, but unfortunately, that is not true either. Because you know, as you say, as soon as we are born, we start to contemplate our aging. Before this conversation, before we opened up, we were talking about how one of my dissertation readers and mentors, Maria Tatar, just published Heroine of 1001 Faces, and brings up this conversation about the hero's journey, heroine's journey that Dara is really a leading expert on. And as that comes up, we asked the question: is it a hero's journey or a heroine's? And is there either or? And I know that a lot of people in our group are storytellers and or psychologists working with these narrative models. Well, beneath all of them, male, female, you name it, is the human journey. And when we just start looking at the basic cycle of life itself, we get to see beautiful metaphors. We get to see, as the riddle of the Sphinx points out, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the afternoon, connecting the aging sun, the afternoon, the aging day with the aging individual. And then we look at the ripeness of a fruit, the aging of the ripeness of a fruit. And then we look at the aging of the moon or of the seasons. And now we have the fall. And so it's so appropriate that we're having this conversation in the fall, in the season of aging. And now, of course, we'll have it during sunset in the afternoon. How appropriate, how cool, and what a cool space to be doing this in. So let me I get to introduce our panelists. Our panelists today are always available. You can always find these on the webpage for the Myth Salon on Myth House. But we're with Dr. Dennis Patrick Slattery, a mythology scholar, poet, longtime professor in Pacifica's Myth program, and author of An Obscure Order, Reflections on Cultural Mythologies. We're gonna have to update that one. A clinical psychologist, Dr. Selina Matthews, is an author and keynote speaker who graduated from Pacifica and has been an ever-present participant and supporter of this Myth Salon. Dr. Zaman Stanizai, who gave our last event on Afghanistan. If you haven't seen that, I hope that you will check that out. And gosh, I'm sure we all wish we had time for an update on that story a month later. Dr. Vorris Nunley, a professor at the University of California, Riverside, who teaches rhetoric, philosophy, and literature. He's interested in issues of heretical energy, the dark feminine, gendered and racialized knowledge, and the demise of vulnerability. We're joined by Dr. Dara Marks, who's been with our panel a couple times. It's wonderful to have you back, Dara. Dara is a leading story expert and a PhD mythologist whose book, Inside Story, Power of the Transformational Arc, has influenced storytellers across Hollywood and around the world. Keep an eye out for her seminars and events and retreats on the feminine heroic. So here you'll find a deep dive on Connie and a deep dive on Rick Moody, who I'd like to introduce, a special panelist here with us today. Rick Moody is visiting faculty in the Creative Longevity and Wisdom program at Fielding Graduate University and he's the retired Vice President for Academic Affairs with AARP in Washington, D.C. For more information on Rick, please check out the website. And finally, Connie, who has done so much for this Myth Salon. We talked about the longevity that we've had, and a lot of that has to do with the support that Connie has given us to create community here and to help us invite a number of wonderful people to speak with us. So Connie is a retired therapist, co-author of Meeting the Shadow and Romancing the Shadow, author of Meeting the Shadow of Spirituality, and a novel, A Moth to the Flame, the life of the Sufi poet Rumi. Her new book, The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul, which has just come out, extends shadow work into late life and teaches aging as a spiritual practice. Connie has been doing contemplative practices for years, for 50 years, and she is wife, grandmother, and was initiated as an elder by Saging International in 2017. After investing in all these roles, she's practicing the shift from role to soul. And if after tonight, you're interested in going deeper into this conversation, she's also putting on an event with the Pacifica Retreat, The Inner Work of Age, Shifting from Role to Soul. November 12th will be the beginning through the 14th. So for more information there, we'll post that into the chat right now. And would love to see you there. And with that, Connie, thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to your presentation. It's wonderful to hear what you've been working on all this time.
Thank you all. Will, I love what you said. First, you said you don't know anything about aging, and then you just gave these gorgeous metaphors. It was really beautiful. So this is really exciting for me to be here tonight because I have this new book, which has been a long labor of love. And I've been teaching about it for the past few weeks, all in the context of depth psychology and the shadow, meeting the shadows of age. And tonight I get to switch gears and explore some of the myths that are hiding beneath our beliefs and fears and concerns about age. And I'm so happy to have this opportunity. So some of you know me as the shadow expert and might be wondering what that has to do with aging well. It turns out that our unconscious fears and images about age actually shape how we age. So let me say that again. Our unconscious beliefs, feelings, and attitudes about old age help determine how we experience it. And I learned that when I read decades of research from Yale University psychologist Becca Levy. And that discovery made me realize I had one more book to write, How We Meet the Shadows of Age. The director of MIT Age Lab noted that there are roughly 8,000 days between birth and college graduation. There are 8,000 days between college graduation and a midlife crisis, and 8,000 days between a midlife crisis and retirement. And then he added, if we've planned well, there are another 8,000 days after retirement. So for the first time in history, this is an unprecedented and unnamed stage of life. And you may have asked, what will I do with that time? Or more deeply, who am I now? So if you long for something more, such as more self-knowledge or gratitude, more meaning or contribution, then you can try the inner work of age. And you can discover how to reorient by turning within and attuning to the soul's longing. And you can discover how to move through this passage of late life as a rite, releasing past forms, facing the unknown, and emerging renewed as an elder with vitality and purpose. You can discover timeless myths that point the way to the treasures of this stage of life, myths that may be influencing you from the unconscious. The emphasis in my new book is on this internal, less familiar terrain of soul, the subtle yearnings that appear in images and fantasies, the ways we respond or fear to respond to those messengers, and the symbolic meanings we glean from them. As we learn the psychological and spiritual practices that I offer, we discover how to orient to our inner worlds. And as we uncover the myths living in our own psyches, we deepen our self-knowledge and reimagine age for ourselves, shifting from denial to awareness, from self-rejection to self-acceptance, from obligation to flow, from holding on to letting go, and from distraction to presence, and what I call from role to soul, a shift in identity from doing to our essential nature. The result is a newfound freedom from the constraints of past roles and identities, an emerging sense of becoming who you were always meant to be, and a profound gratitude for the way that your life unfolded. This is the deeper dimension of age, the universal journey of human individuation, the unfolding of our authenticity and authority, and even the unfolding of advanced stages of human development, which are described in myths and fairy tales and the perennial traditions as the purpose of late life. As my 68th birthday approached, I had the following dream. I'm putting my purse into the backseat of a car, and a woman comes and grabs it, running off with it. I chase her, calling out and following her into a house. I look through everything, go into the bedroom, look under the mattress, and I can't find it. She turns and says, okay, and opens a drawer and takes out the purse. I recognize her as Paula from my high school. I hadn't thought of 68 as a significant birthday, but apparently this inching toward late life had triggered another identity crisis. The loss of my ID or identity, as symbolized by the driver's license in my wallet. I knew all about midlife crisis, but I hadn't heard about late life identity crisis. Why did someone I hadn't seen in 50 years show up and steal my purse? In the dream, I'm compelled to get back the bag, to reclaim it from the past. And this is a key task of late life. To recognize early self-concepts and rejected parts, to begin to repair them, and cultivate a broader, deeper sense of identity. With her tricky action, Paula had pulled me back to the past, only to find that my real identity was not what I thought it was back then, and is not what I think it is now. When Paula hands me the purse, it's empty. My ID wasn't stolen. The purse was just an empty vehicle for identity. The purse is like my body. It's been robbed. The thief of age has stolen my ID and forced me to contemplate again where my ID is truly located. It's not in a possession. It's not in the body. It's not in my beliefs. It's not in my relationships. It's not in my race or gender. These are vehicles for the soul. As the vehicles decline, what does the soul ask of us? Are we stuck in a past identity that no longer serves the stage of life? Are we fighting an old fight against parental values that no longer matters? Are we unknowingly living a worn out personal myth that no longer serves the evolution of soul? The high school acquaintance was a messenger from the hidden world, reminding me that I no longer need to reject the past of my youth. I no longer need to fight for an identity of my own. That task belongs to an earlier stage of the journey. I'm in a new moment now, a new stage of life, reorienting to become an elder. The dream messenger reminded me of a famous Buddhist tale of divine messengers, a myth about waking up to the truths of human life. It's said that more than 2,000 years ago in the north of India, there was a prince, Siddhartha, who lived in a palace with beautiful gardens filled with the sounds of bells, music, fountains, and songbirds. The king, his father, made sure that Siddhartha was surrounded only by beauty, without ever knowing fear, suffering, or sadness. But curiosity captured the prince. When he was 29, he ordered his charioteer to take him outside the palace gates. At the edge of a crowd, he saw a woman and man bent and gaunt. Their skin was cracked, their teeth chattered, gray hair hung to their shoulders. And the prince asked, "What are these? What has nature made them like this?" "Sir, these creatures are like all others who live into the twilight of their years. They're old. They were once children, nursing at their mother's breast. They grew to have strength and beauty. They married and raised families. And now they are a ruin of what they were." The prince asked, "Will this be my fate?" "My lord, no one who lives can escape this fate." The prince shuddered. His eyes wandered to the crowds. But the world is not frantic with terror. How can they ignore our common fate? For an instant, the prince saw through the surface of life. Meeting old age, he encountered the first divine messenger and his glimpse of the truth. Many of us, as young people, live under a spell, oblivious of the stark realities of human suffering, old age, sickness, and death. The spell of youth leads us to feel immortal, to live as if life has no limits. After Siddhartha saw the frail old man and woman, he saw two more messengers, someone ill and someone dead. But walking further, he saw a wandering monk and imagined a life beyond suffering, a life of higher purpose dedicated to spiritual awakening. These divine messengers, old age, illness, and death, are gods or archetypal forces that carry the power to shock us out of the spell. They carry the power to awaken in us an awareness of the fragile nature of our bodies, the fleeting quality of time, and the end to come. Potentially, they awaken in us a yearning to turn our attention away from the trivial and toward what is essential, away from distraction and toward the inner life. Let's imagine that the Buddha did not heed the calls of the messengers. Maybe he denied their meaning and returned home to become just another king. Or he entered the street and joined the fray, becoming just another hedonist or nihilist. Following the path of denial, he would not have followed his fate and crossed the threshold to become the Buddha. There's something in each of us that resists the summons and longs to stay asleep, pushing away the reality of our aging. We want to remain young and naive, or strong and in control, or productive and heroic. This identification with youth and denial of age is the first obstacle to overcome in the inner work of age. My book is built around these unconscious inner obstacles or shadow characters and the developmental tasks we need to do to overcome them. Our experience of aging is structured not only by our genes, but by our culture as a social construct. While aging may look and feel different in different bodies and different cultures, it remains the certain fate of every human being, no matter who we are, how we've lived, what we've learned. My husband says, what we eat. Eventually, our individuality, that is my Conniness and your you-ness, will end its corporeal existence. And so the meanings we give to the construct of age, when do you become old? How does age define who you are? What is age-appropriate dress or behavior? What does it mean that you're too old to do that? These are rooted in our early and ongoing life experience, in the gestures, glances, and myths that we internalize about late life, whether from family, friends, or media. But there's something more behind the familial and cultural messages, the archetype of age. The fairy tales we heard while growing up, which we then read to our kids and grandkids, introduce us to the wise old man, the good witch, magician, the sage, the mentor. The Harry Potter books introduced Professor Dumbledore, headmaster, elder, adversary, and the man who embodies evil. Lord of the Rings brought us Gandalf, and Star Wars brought us Yoda and Obi-Wan, all timeless, wise, memorable figures. Other cultures throughout history have been aware of this blueprint. In Hinduism, Kali, the divine mother, who's imagined as dark-skinned, many-armed, and wearing a necklace of skulls, is the goddess of birth, death, and transformation. She weaves time in a mythic cycle rather than a straight line. In ancient Greece, the spirit of age was embodied in Geras, a shriveled old man with a cane who appears on ancient pottery. For the Greeks, the more Geras, the more years in gravitas one acquired, the more virtue and excellence one gained. The gods of age are often personifications of time and fate. For example, the ancient Roman god of Saturn, known as Kronos, Father Time, is envisioned as an elderly bearded man with wings. He carries a scythe like the Grim Reaper and an hourglass to remind us that time is fleeting. He reveals the lie of endless life and the truth of mortality. Age and death are always already present. They're given, decreed, woven into the web of life from the beginning. How do we relate to these larger forces? Are they in us or are we in them? Aging is a moment-to-moment encounter with forces beyond our control. As they manifest in our lives, whether as forced retirement, diminishment of capacity, life-threatening illness, grief for lost loved ones, we have only one choice: how we relate to our fate. The tree doesn't resist when its leaves begin to brown and fall to the soil, as somebody posted in the chat. Do we cling to the blossoms of spring, or do we let go to flow with the larger forces of nature? Consciously or unconsciously, we live in this tension between our ego's desires for immortality, safety, and unconditional love, and the certain fate. What if we could surrender to the forces at work in our aging? Is the decline of the body an opening for the arising of something else? What does the aging body reveal of the soul? How do we become simply who we are now? According to an ancient Sufi story told by Idris Shah in Tale of the Dervishes, the master of a large household needed to go abroad for a long time. He decided to leave his trusted, capable butler in charge of his affairs. When the master returned after many years, he discovered the butler no longer recognized him. The butler believed that he was master of the house. In fact, the butler became so identified with his role that he was unwilling to give it up. So the master needed to send in his henchmen, what I call shadow figures: depression, anxiety, envy, competition. And as a result, the butler felt afraid that he would be found out to be a fraud. Eventually, the butler was humbled and forced to surrender to the master's authentic power, and the master returned to his place as head of the home. As each of us chooses not to merely grow old, but to grow whole, to intentionally step across the threshold and become an elder, we can cultivate a shift in identity from butler to master, from ego to self, from a separate sense of self to a transcendent universal sense of self. The foundation for our late life development has been described in stories like this one, and spiritual traditions as ego transcendence or symbolic death, because our bounded limited identity dies into an expanded identity. As Jesus put it, not my will, but thy will be done. In Sufism, students are advised to die before you die. Jewish Kabbalists speak of the kiss of death. In Zen Buddhism, Satori is called the great death. And Carl Jung articulated this in Mysterium when he said, the experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego. The ego or butler here is not the enemy, but in late life, we seek a changing of the gods from hero to elder, or from role to soul. When we want to transfer our center of gravity from small self-interest to larger communal and planetary well-being, from self-aggrandizement to self-actualization, the ego can no longer reign supreme. The elder is not another role to be put on like a change of wardrobe. We don't become elders because we have a Medicare birthday. It's a deep interior shift from role to soul and from soul to higher stages of awareness. Joseph Campbell's renowned telling of the hero's journey ends with the hero reborn, returning to the ordinary world with a boon. I like to think of this boon as the deeper, wider awareness of the elder, which is then transmitted to the next generation. And we can talk about this because we have some Campbell experts here if we want to. In myths and tales, we see the elder, teacher, or mentor aiding or training the hero, like the fairy godmother with Cinderella or Merlin with King Arthur. This figure is inspired by divine wisdom and a connection to the spiritual realm. Consider how Obi-Wan Kenobi gives Luke his father's lightsaber. So after our dramatic heroic journeys from youth through midlife, we can re-enter the story as those wise women and men who mentored us on the path and give our hard-won knowledge and boons to the next generation. To do this, we need to take the empty seat that awaits us, pass the lightsaber, and transmit values to the next generation, for the world needs the wisdom and gifts of older adults. It's nourishment for a world starved of meaning. The elder is a stage, not an age. It's a qualitative transition like water to ice. And that means that a 55-year-old who serves her soul's mission with authenticity and gravitas may be an elder, while an 85-year-old who believes he's a victim and feels rigid and bitter may not. So the shift requires a rite of passage, 3 steps through which the soul evolves to another stage of awareness. And in addition to the classical model of transitions, I add the shadow dimension. So shadow characters can block our movement through any stage, and those are explored in the book. I'm not going to do that here. So the 3 stages are letting go of the ego's agenda, moving into liminality or the neutral zone, meeting the inner elder, and I have a visualization to experience that in the book, and new beginnings, emerging as the elder on the other side of the threshold so that our center of gravity moves from ego to soul. And we've pinpointed our unique offerings and committed to give them in service to others, seeding the next generation. The elder may wear the face of a shaman, factory worker, healer, political leader, singer, storyteller, ecologist, CEO, scientist, craftsperson, educator, gardener, grandmother, artist. He or she may wear your face. Campbell pointed out in the title of his famous book, Hero with 1,000 Faces, that the hero archetype appears in countless images. In the same way, the elder archetype appears in countless images, and there are as many faces of the elder as there are elders. For some of us, the call to be an elder is the call to be an earth elder. Those of us in late life now were the first generation to know about environmental disaster, and few of us did anything meaningful about it. Today, we know that what happens to each of us happens to all of us. Today, we're awakening from the trance of denial, and we're called to bring the moral voice of the elder to do our part for all living things. Do you hear the call? It rises up from your soul and from the soul of the world. What will you tell your grandchildren or great-grandchildren when they ask, what did you do when you found out about the climate crisis? Earth elders may look like you. Others will hear the call to become socially or politically empowered activist elders, joining the youth who are fighting for the end of income inequality, hunger, homelessness, gun violence, money in politics, mass incarceration, and rampant sexual assault. Activist elders may look like you. Some of us will hear the call to become creative elders, allowing visual or performing art to move through us and offer inspiration. Creative elders may look like you. Some of us will hear the call to become spiritual elders, teaching contemplative practices to those lost in digital distraction. If we are grounded in pure awareness or inner silence, we can hold space for the highest human possibilities of those who are coming. We can anchor presence for the next generations. Spiritual elders may look like you. Let me tell you a mythic tale here. There was a great drought. For months, there had not been a drop of rain, and the situation became catastrophic. The Catholics made processions, the Protestants made prayers, the Chinese shot off guns to frighten away the demons, but no result. Finally, the Chinese said, "We will fetch the Rainmaker." From another province, a dried up old man appeared. The only thing he asked for was a quiet little house, and he locked himself in for 3 days. On the 4th day, the clouds gathered and there was a great snowstorm. A visitor went to ask the man how he had done it. "They call you the Rainmaker. Will you tell me how you made the snow?" The man said, "I didn't make the snow. I'm not responsible." "But what have you done these 3 days?" "Oh, I can explain that. I come from another country where things are in order. Here they are not as they should be by the ordinance of heaven. So the whole country is not in Tao. And I am not in the natural order things because I'm in a disordered country. So I had to wait 3 days until I was back in Tao, and then naturally the rain came." This was paraphrased from Carl Jung in Mysterium, retelling a story told to him by Richard Wilhelm. This is not a tale of heroic feats. He's not running around trying to fix the problem or change people's beliefs. The Rainmaker knows that no amount of action will create a connection to the waters of life. Rather, this is a tale of a wise elder as a tuning fork, a man aligning with something greater so that the world can come back into harmony. The Rainmaker feels the disturbance inside himself. He feels it in the world he's visiting, and he knows that he's not separate from the dried, broken world. When he becomes aligned with the source, nature responds, and the whole community is realigned. His inner work is not separate from his outer work. As he heals his own soul, he heals the soul of the world. Perhaps you can allow the spiritual elder to become an aspirational image for you, an archetype that stirs in you even now. I began meditation at the young age of 19 for no noble purpose, because a man wouldn't date me unless I was meditating. But that turn toward the East changed everything for me. And for 50 years, I've lived the vow of enlightenment in my heart, my practices, my values, my soul. I know intimately many people who have attained it, people who live in very advanced stages of awareness. So the mythology of spiritual awakening has been at the root of my story, Hindu mythology in particular. In India, the 5 stages of life are ashramas, are student, householder, grandparent, and monk. The last stage, monk or recluse, is called sannyasin, or renunciation, in which a woman or man leaves behind all the roles from family, work, and possessions, and wanders free of attachment to focus on spiritual practice. This image and its wealth of meanings have been embedded in me throughout my adult life. And I think that's true for many baby boomers who began spiritual practice early in life, in their 20s. So it was natural as I inched toward my 70s for me to want to downsize my home, my belongings, and especially to downsize my ego. That's the real work, of course. Our images of the divine and our fantasies of a spiritual life are powerful lures in our later years. And I write in the book about how to complete unfinished spiritual business, because it's so essential as we move toward life completion. The legend of Moses wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, but forbidden by God to enter the promised land at the end of his life, is like a Rorschach test. Some people imagine Moses feeling angry and betrayed at the end of his life, shedding tears of despair. Others imagine him disappointed because he died before his task was complete. But perhaps that's how it is for everyone. We all leave some things, even important ones, unfinished. Moses, at 120, died in the desert, not in the promised land. But the story goes, God received his soul by kissing him on the mouth, forgiven, complete. If we hold the view that Moses failed, we're judging him through a goal-oriented lens. The only goal is entering the promised land. But through another lens, we can see Moses' journey as invaluable but unfinished. He transmitted the Torah while still wishing for more. Jesus, the story goes, faced temptation in the end and found victory in resurrection. Buddha, the story goes, faced temptation as well and found victory in nirvana. What is a completed life? Is it based on a feeling of fulfillment, gratitude, forgiveness? A belief in redemption, salvation, or reincarnation? The achievement of an external goal? The transmission of a legacy? Is it based on an internal attainment of a spiritual stage of awareness? Many of us have had the sense of wandering for years in a desert-like landscape and longing for home. Like Moses, we've given our gifts, and like him, we sense that we've been denied entry to something somewhere. This image of the promised land, salvation or enlightenment, may have been out of sight in the shadow. Maybe we glimpsed it in our dreams or in art. For some people with a traditional religious orientation, it's been defined by others as heaven or at the hand of God. For those with a more Eastern or mystical orientation, it's been conceived of as a level of consciousness and awakening to the true nature of reality, a direct perception of the unity of all things. In either case, conscious or unconscious, this image has acted as a lure, stimulating our soul's longing to reach what is just out of reach. It has directed our wandering, orienting us in a direction even unknowingly. So I ask, what is your promised land? Who has forbidden entry? Can life be perfect yet unfinished? Here's the final myth for you. There was a merchant in Baghdad who sent his servant to market to buy provisions. In a little while, the servant came back, pale and trembling, and he said, "Master, in the marketplace, I was jostled by a woman in the crowd. When I turned, I saw that the woman was deaf. She looked at me and made a threatening gesture. So, master, lend me your horse and I'll ride away to Samara, and death will not find me." The merchant gave him the horse, and the servant galloped away. Then the merchant went down to the marketplace, saw death in the crowd, and said to her, "Why did you make a threatening gesture to my servant when you saw him this morning?" "That was not a threatening gesture," Death said. "It was a start of surprise. I was astonished to see him in Baghdad, for I have an appointment with him tonight in Samara." This ancient Babylonian tale is called The Appointment in Samara. We all have an appointment with death. No matter who we are, what we believe, we as individuals will die. And having crossed the threshold from role to soul, from hero to elder, we will be shepherded by death across the threshold from elder to ancestor. We may deny it or compartmentalize it, but our death is scheduled on the cosmic calendar. The mind can't conceive of our end. The ego can't tolerate its annihilation. We imagine my death, rather than death as an archetype, a blueprint built into the cycles of every living thing. We imagine death as intruder, death as thief, death as enemy, rather than an acorn falling, composting, and returning as an oak. Or a raindrop falling into the sea, rising again to form a cloud, and falling again to dissolve into its source. When we identify with this separateness, this drop of myness, our sense of isolation prevents us from seeing that death is as eternal as life. Without a direct spiritual experience of unity, the interconnectedness of all, we personalize death and try to overcome it. In the time of the coronavirus, as Dana was describing, death is all around us. And yet some people continue to deny their vulnerability, even now, and some even at the end of their lives. But others woke up to mortality, more acutely aware of the tenuous thread, more present to the gifts of love all around us, and to the deeper truth that all this shall pass. Just as youth is a spell, death is a spell, cast by a force to be reckoned with and dragging us toward an end that we do not claim. But if, as we age, we maintain mortality awareness in our peripheral vision, and it moves slowly into our sights, we may choose a different end. We may come to accept that to live in this world, we must love what is mortal and inevitably let it go. We can prepare breath by breath. We can use the practices that ground and open us, whether it's mantra, mindfulness, Zen, chanting, prayer, devotion to a teacher or deity. We can connect with what lies behind our personality, beneath our roles. We can align with what is in presence and imagine again and again, releasing our identification with our bodies, our thoughts, our feelings. And as the ego is leveled by the inner work of age, completing its story to live as a soul, it opens to mystery. Having released the spell of youth, the heroic myth of progress, the dreams of endless power, endless travel, endless hope, we can face the end gracefully. To my surprise, I discovered that Jung called death a goal that's being lived unconsciously in the shadow. He said, if we listen to the quieter voices of our deeper nature, we become aware of the fact that soon after the middle of life, the soul begins its secret work, getting ready for the departure. In other words, the shadow knows. Death is not a failure to the soul as it is to the heroic ego. Behind the ego's fortress of denial, something in the shadow is preparing us for the end. This something is separate from the conscious mind, but it's purposeful. It's helping us orient to the noble tasks of aging and death. This something is the soul's holy longing, carrying us to the great return. Imagining death not as an intruder, but as a homecoming. When we align with it, we're aligning not only with the cycles of nature, but with evolution itself. In denial, the ego doesn't open to the preparation occurring in the shadow. In denial, we live as if we will never die, and we fail to do life completion. We fail to become an elder. We fail to cross over from role to soul. In fact, we die as if we never lived. What if instead we open a channel of communication between ego and shadow so that the wall between them became more permeable? We can allow the ego to recede and the silenced voices from the darkness to be heard. This is the gift of shadow work. Yes, our individuality dies, our separateness dies, but the spiritual essence of who we are cannot be annihilated. Whether we view that as atoms, genes, ecosystems, the web of life, a reincarnating soul, or transcendent spirit, we are that, and it is eternal. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Connie. That was, I mean, what a survey of mythic figures and film figures from film, aged figures, a full range of them. You know, I know that when I think like when we look at the horizon, everything comes to a point, but that's only our perception. Realistically, on the other side of that point is just as big as anywhere else. And so when you look at to the horizon of age, it's so easy to let it collapse into a single figure. And you stretched it back out and showed us all these different figures. I think of a conversation I had with an email actually with Lansing Smith, who was with us for the Green Knight event. And I wrote to him and I said, we have all these myths of having to kill the father to replace the older generation. And I asked, are there stories where instead, like the younger generation, like teams up with the older generation? And he goes, yeah, Anchises and Odysseus, Odysseus and Telemachus, Aeneas and Anchises, Jesus and Jehovah. And you're like, oh, we talk about big steps forward when the generations killed the one that's in the way, but ages, epochs launched when they work together. And I hope that's a time that we're in right now, because we need that level of change. And I just wonder if you want to speak a little bit to a little bit more about that role of partnering with the younger generation to fulfill, maybe the visions of youth that were there that have now matured.
That's so beautiful, Will. I hadn't actually looked at myths of intergenerational. I mean, what I'm really aware of right now is the intergenerational work being done around the climate crisis. And that is really, as horrific as it is, that in itself has been inspiring to me. And there are many, many groups of young and older people getting together, teaching, learning from one another, and really engaging in activism around this.
Dara, you're also with us this month. Wonder if you'd like to jump in with any thoughts or questions.
Oh, it stirs up so much. I cannot thank you enough, Connie. This is such an important topic. One of the things that I have been thinking about age for quite some time, and you also mention it in talking about it in a historical context, that never in the history of the world have people lived this long. And so age was often 50 years old, and
That's
now
right.
we're going up to 100. And not only are we going up, we're going up massively, which means there is a collective consciousness that is suddenly in a whole new, well, not a new category, but a category that has never expanded like this before. So we've always had an expansive category of newborn and youth and adolescence and so on. And suddenly we have this very expansive group of elders. And this is very, very new. I mean, this is within 100 years, 150 years at the most. And I think it's something that we really want to take a look at, because when we look at transformational issues of maturity, we understand the rites of passage and of initiation from adolescent to moving into the adult world, from the single to married to to different levels in life. We aren't very good at it these days, but there is at least a recognition around the fact that there is initiation and there is transformation. And we don't, because I think this is evolving, we don't really have a consciousness yet around this evolution and its whole initiation into elder, so that we are of first generations, and I'm talking about something on a massive scale, it certainly have been old people throughout time, but massively, we are newer generations that are experiencing this en masse. And I think, the absence, of course, of the recognition of transformation, of initiation, is always something that is devastating to any group. And therefore, you've got massively people moving into the elder category with no guidance, no a great example. Well, we have examples certainly, but not held in a certain context, of exemplar and so on and so forth. And I think especially to a group like our Pacifica friends, this is something very poignant, I think, to really kind of hold that we're on the cusp of something that is so powerful, because think about what it means to have this collective group of elders, of people moving into wisdom. And instead of letting it sort of splat itself into the world, imagine somehow being able to give it value and give it context, and suddenly it could be of explosive value to the world.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm going on. I'm sorry, Connie.
You know, it's an unprecedented stage of life, and therefore it's unnamed.
Mm-hmm.
There's tens of thousands of baby boomers now who are going to live longer than anyone in human history. And so it's a change in the species, in the development of the species from that point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And there are rites of passage in indigenous cultures, but in Western post-industrial culture, there is no rite of passage, and there's no acknowledgement even of the value and the nobility of the archetype of elder.
Absolutely.
And part of it is because we swim in ageist institutions and ageist messaging from the media, and we internalize that ageism. So I think that you know, the myths, when I was looking at the mythologies and I was trying to kind of imagine how the myths were affecting me unknowingly as I was living into this stage, I realized that I didn't have any positive models for elders when I was growing up. Most of the myths and fairy tales I was read were kind of dark and all about, you know, good versus evil stuff. And they were not inspiring elder images. So where are these stories and archetypes going to come from now? How are we going to transmit them to younger generations? I hope that people of all ages read my book for that reason. I don't think it's only for people, you know, in later life. Because if we internalize ageism early, then it shapes our lives as we go through the lifespan. So it's an issue for all generations. And so that takes us back to Will's point about intergenerational collaboration and how that would affect our self-images, our competence. I think one of the things that occurred to me, Will, is in the workplace, there's intergenerational mentoring going on where younger people are teaching technology to older adults who are also teaching, you know, workplace skills to younger people.
When I was middle-aged, okay, probably in young middle-aged, I went to a Jewish service for the High Holy Days, and there was the rabbi did towards the end sort of did a ceremony, and he took a tallis, a big scarf-like thing, and he had people hold up the edges of it to create a chuppah or a sort of a tent kind of situation. And he invited everybody to come up for various blessings, and he invited young people, you know, if you're young or if you're newlywed or whatever, and people would come up kind of in groups, and he offered a blessing. And his final group was elders, and he held up and he said, "Now I'd like any elders to come up." And a couple of really old people said, "Okay, fine." And they went up and stood under it. And he looked at the group and he said, "No, when I'm saying elders," he said, "I don't just mean by age." He said, "If you're a teacher, you're an elder." And I was in the middle of really the throes of in life of kind of trying to understand my path. And it was kind of in that moment that I recognized that I am a teacher. This is what I do. And I went up and got the blessing and everything. But it was a big moment of transformation in consciousness for me, of holding you know, of recognizing that a kind of movement that I held elder is in the kind of thing, well, to say I'm an elder, that's a big ego, whatever. And it wasn't. I suddenly saw it in a very different context. It was kind of asking me to take what I had been given in life and pass it forward.
Yes.
And it was in that
Yes.
context that I suddenly felt a kind of a movement that has really helped guide me very much in my life. So I just wanted to add that also to the context of his comment and the idea of eldering.
Thank you.
I really loved the whole talk that you gave, and I can't wait to get into the book. Here's two things that struck me, and I think they're going to be microcosmic, and one of them is going to be very personal because it's a very real experience. I'll be 77 October 12th, so that's coming up. And your talk has really incited me to pay more attention to what actually is falling away in my life now. And sidebar, the other conversation that would be interesting to have is the rich relationship between grandparents and grandchildren. And with what Dara was suggesting, I thought, you know, my four-year-old granddaughter is an elder in the sense that every time we have her over or that we go to our son's house, she teaches me something in the way that she looks at things and just wonders about them. So let's hear it for the four-year-old elders as well. But on a personal level, this has been very helpful, and I'm going to share this with all of you. For the last 53 years, I've been riding motorcycles. And in that time, I've probably ridden around 240,000 miles. I have not had a motorcycle since I was 24. In the last 6 months, all libido towards riding has drained from the experience. And so listening to you, I'm really guided by you to ask, I mean, we know that motorcycles as metaphors, if not symbols, have been huge in our culture and really internationally. You know, they carry a lot in those saddlebags on what they mean for someone who rides. And of course, I've been riding with both of my sons for 6 or 8 years, and that is wonderful bonding time with them when the three of us go riding. But what you're doing is pushing me to really meditate on what is that in that mode of transportation. And the mythology of motorcycles, I think, is absolutely fascinating in popular culture. So I guess I'm thanking you for reframing what's taking place in me. And I'm having the second one, having some repair work on it. And then both of them are going to go into the cycle newsletter to sell. And here's the best part of that. I'm absolutely comfortable with letting them go. So it's big for me. And I thought I wanted to use a concrete example that I'm living in right now, because you just pushed it on the center stage.
That's so beautiful, Dennis.
Thank you.
And we all have a motorcycle that we need to let go of.
Yeah, right. Right. Agreed.
Just such I'm reading your book. I'm not quite finished, but it is inspiring me so much.
Oh.
You know, I work with the elderly. It's about 30% of my practice. And when they come in, they are depressed. they have anxiety, they're detached from their families. And what I love about this population is they really want to dig into their work. They are ready in a way that people in their 20s and 30s are not willing to do the work. I'm going to talk about this one client of mine. I probably started seeing her when she was 78. And she kept on saying, you know, I wish I would have been an actress. I wish I would have been like Carol Channing, for those of you who remember who she was. So so I said, okay, if you really want to do that, let's get you some headshots. Let's get you an agent. And so I want you to know she got an agent. She is now working. She is now, she's doing print work. She's doing commercials. She now takes her phone and she shoots herself because everything is now digital. So she auditions digitally and she is moving into this place. And it's like reclaiming so many parts of herself. And I find this to be incredibly inspiring because we can be anything we want to be. There are no bounds anymore. And I'm just thrilled. And I have many other stories, but I'm so passionate about what you've presented, the myth of life completion, because I think as a therapist, what we are doing is helping people that are in this stage to complete and clean up any odds and ends in their life so that when they transit, they will be ready, they will be in grace. And as I have spent time with people in that place of in late stage hospice, they go with grace because they've done the work.
Beautiful, Selina. That's so beautiful. Yeah, so I tried to offer the practices that would allow that to happen. I offer, practices like how to do a life review and see where you want, and the life review in the shadow as well, the unlived life. So you see what you want to reclaim and live out now, or you see where you need to do relational repair and give and receive forgiveness, and spiritual work where, you see where your relationship with the divine has gotten stuck, where you're struggling, and what are your beliefs about death. And so I had this fantasy that maybe some therapists would pick it up and be able to use it with older clients. So it's really moving to me to hear that because, when you're writing, you never know. You never know who will, if anyone will even pick up the book. But yeah, it definitely has clinical applications for people who have a guide. Yeah.
I've been dealing with age and death myself for the last few weeks. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I went up to Napa to the Jackson Browne concert. And he played this one song, For a Dancer. My wife is telling me, see, I have voices that come into me and they help this. And in the middle of the concert, I texted my mom, who has been, I'll say it in a really positive sort of way, on her deathbed for several weeks, seriously. And she would get these brief episodes where she would come out of them and we would have great conversations. And I had talked to her like on the Saturday before we went up there. And I said to my sister, who was there with her, living together and spending my mom's all of their final days together, I said, play this song for her. And she played it, and I got a text back within about 20 minutes. She says, that was an unbelievable experience. You would not have believed it. Well, the following morning, I got a call from my sister and said, Mom's up. Do you want to talk to her? Of course I do. Yes. Okay. So I went out on the balcony. We were staying with my sister-in-law, and I had a great conversation, and it lasted maybe 10 minutes. My mom is fully aware of the phase of her life that she is greeting oneness. She is moving into this phase of entering the relationship with the Great Mother. And she slipped that day into sleep and didn't wake up. She died about 3 or 4 days later. And it was a beautiful passing. It was so graceful to hear my sister describe it. It just could not have been an effort. It was anything but raging against the dying of the light. There was no tension. There was nothing. And it has been a resounding tribute to the quality of life that she led, but it's something to which, when we look at the tail end of anything that is living, as the George Harrison song from the Tao Te Ching, verse 23 says, all things must pass. Everything that is living dies. And so that's why I picked this living and dying verse 50 today. We are so obsessed with permanence that we don't embrace ephemerality. We don't embrace the transitional nature of what existence is about. And so we step outside of oneness and make oneness an idea rather than a reality. So I really thank you for bringing the topic up today, Connie, and for everyone being here.
That was beautiful, Dana. I loved your opening verses, and I'm sorry about your mom, but it sounds like it was a beautiful closing.
It was and is. I mean, it remains. She endures, as are all things that pass endure.
Mm-hmm.
Now that they are, we breathe life into them as they are living. If everything that is opposite us and outside of us that we don't connect with pushes us into that ego frame of separation into the separate self.
Yeah.
And when we allow ourselves to connect with one another through this interconnected space of interbeing, none of the personal space becomes material. None of it matters. And so, anyway.
Yeah, so I highly recommend Jackson's new album, Downhill from Everywhere, and also Leonard Cohen's last couple of albums, which were also on these themes. And, you know, they're both just genius lyricists.
Well, I love that song, It Happens to the Heart.
I see myself good too. Well, it's good as well. I am kind of hesitant, but here are my thoughts. If shadow is nothing by itself except the absence of light, then death itself is nothing except the absence of life. A friend of mine once asked me if I could talk. He had a memorial service for his mother. He asked me if I could talk in that memorial service, and I said, like, what about? And he gave me this look like, I mean, isn't it too obvious about death? And I said, what if I don't believe in death? And it's like, you as a good Muslim and all these things, you don't believe in death? I say, no, it's not part of my faith. The Quran clearly says that there is no death, because believing in the life after death is part of the faith, as its descriptive definition implies. I think we are somehow forgetting the fact that we are not only physical beings, but spiritual as well. The difference in the context that we are discussing is that the physical is subject to the law of physics, and the laws of physics are time and place. And at one level, that reality is defined by time and place, and ageism that we talked about. But spirit is not physical. It is not subject to time and place, and therefore there is no dying in it. And so in its truer sense, if we believe ourselves in being spiritual beings, spirit beings, if I may put it that way, then we don't die. It's in the believing or not believing, but it's reacting towards this physical that sometimes worries us. I had my bout with that argument when I was a teenager college student and I was studying French. I happened to be the youngest person in the class. And my French teacher often made it a point when he wanted to talk about the youngest, the oldest, and all these, comparative adjectives. He always pointed to me, and I felt like, oh, wait a minute, aren't I so special here? But when I turned 20, I had the greatest level of, I felt so depressed. I thought the world had come to an end, because I was no longer writing my age with the number 1 before it, and it had turned into 2. And I was just thinking, like, if this is how I feel about being 20, imagine how I would feel when I grow older and older. But apparently that was it. Now, I sometimes join people in conversation, sometimes people who are much younger, and I feel very comfortable, and they give me a look, and it's like, oh, they bow and take a step back, and to give me respect because of my age. And I was like, wait a minute, what happened? And then I become and say, oh my God, they are looking at my age, and I have no idea that there is that much difference. But so the point is that if we really believe in ourselves as a spirit being, and that the spirit is our essence, then we are not dying, and our reaction is only to the physical, and that is also cultural, because if you see, let's say, a couple of especially women, but men as well sometimes, but women are more outspoken in a Western culture. And if they are arguing, the argument might have something to do, and if it has to do with age, the argument might be that everyone would be trying to, give her age to be the youngest or younger. However, if you go to a culture like in Tibet or Nepal, if there is, analogously speaking, if there is a similar argument, the argument would be every woman would be telling the others that she's the oldest. Because it's the exact opposite. There is that much more respect for age. And age is seen more as wisdom, as experience, as achievement. And therefore, to be presented as someone older than younger is seen more of as a positive, as a virtue in the Tibetan culture, in the Nepal as well. I'm sure there are other cultures also, but here in the West, there's so much obsession with ageism in of course in the opposite direction. People often not giving their own age and all that. But I don't know if there's a whole lot of this cultural thing to it.
I think it's important to clarify levels when we're having this kind of conversation. So there is a level at which I tried to communicate that will die. My Conniness will die. My body, mind will die. If I'm in denial of that, then I lose a lot of opportunity for this stage of life and what the promise, all the possibilities for this time. But there is another part of me that will not die. And I think I said that. It's not, and it, my job isn't to tell people what to believe. So my book is not advocating beliefs in, materialism or reincarnation or science or mysticism. It's not about beliefs. It's about, there is a part of us that is ageless, that won't die. And whether we look at that materially as our genes will go on, or spiritually as, you said spirit, I would call it consciousness will go on, then, but that doesn't preclude the fact that my Conniness will disappear and nobody will remember me in a minute. And I want to have an awareness of that so that I can take advantage of the time that remains for my individuality. So it's and somebody mentioned in the chat about non-duality. So what I'm really advocating is experience rather than belief, spiritual practice to experience like the kind of unitive states that Rumi experienced, which we can see so clearly in his verses, and that mystics from all traditions have experienced, and that some of my dearest friends have experienced. So I'm advocating practice so that we can deepen our internal experience of that unity or spirit or whatever we call it. But there is also a truth that the physical will die. From my point of view, that's important. It's information that I want to be aware of.
One thing I always think about is the myth of Osiris, or the story of Osiris, where the one thing, Isis puts the whole body back together, except the penis, of course. The one thing, and that symbol of that embodied mortal, I'm pretty sure if something comes with me to the afterlife, it's not going to be my penis. It's not going to be what that symbolizes of my incarnated individuality. And I think that's super interesting that, we have to confront, we have to come to terms with what that's going to be like for Osiris to, there will be a part that maybe doesn't come with us to the next round. And I think about what Dennis is saying about letting go and how natural it is to let go for you. And it's actually really comforting for me to hear, because I have to admit, sometimes mortality is pretty tough for me. If I'm up at 1 a.m., it's dangerous because I'm likely to start just thinking about death and freak the hell out about it. I'm not yet at that place where that sounds all wonderful and good and easy. It freaks me out. And, if I'm fully honest about it. But when I get freaked out, I think about people that I really care about, like my grandfather, and how he aged and died, and the dignity with which he did that. And I think about people like Walter O'Dynnick, and the dignity and the serenity with which they, move forward into that. And, I have hope that something will happen in me so that I might feel that way when that time comes. And, we think about, we've been talking about ripeness and twilight years and that kind of thing. And that one of the ultimate symbols of going to the other world, to the underworld, is that golden bough. And one of the defining qualities of the golden bough is that when for the right person who's truly ready to go, it will practically fall off in your hand. And that's one of the things about a truly ripe fruit, and I think about, gosh, I'm hopeful that some of these experiences I have now with stems that do not want to be yanked free will eventually come to that place where it's so ripe that there's this desire to let go. And I hope that that includes, my relationship to that part of me that I don't believe will come forward. That piece of Osiris that symbolizes that which won't come. So I just appreciate going to this place in the conversation. And I also really appreciate being here with so many elders and mentors of my own.
We can make that connection between the Osiris being put back together without the penis. There is one of the shortest surahs, chapters in the Quran is close to the end of the Quran, which says basically that there's God, the eternal, and then the next word is that, and there's nothing that could be compared to him, but there's a key word here, and the key word is that God is the uncaused, cause of all beings. But in there, the etymological root of the word is samad. The etymological root is the being without the navel point. Is that when
it's birthless?
birthless, right? So it's the navel point that is cut. When you're cut, the umbilical cord is cut, you're separated from something. So then you had to have belonged to someone. And in this case, if you do not have that umbilical cord, then you are not part of any chain. You are separate in that sense. So again, I think if we put those two together, the Quranic myth and the Egyptian myth, I think at the spiritual level, there is no, well, I might have to go to another word in the Quran. That one is the created as a process. The other one is that which is created as a continuum. In other words, not separate from God. And if we are the soul, the spirit, the consciousness that is connected with God, in that case, the eternal God's attributes would apply to us too, so therefore we don't die. I don't know if that makes sense, but for me, someone whose name Zaman means time, I'm trying to defy myself.
I really enjoyed the talk. And one of the reasons is what your talk has brought out of the panelists and what that's made me think about. So when Selina brought up the notion of grace and how the elderly work for it, it made me think of Toni Morrison, who, as everyone knows, is my favorite theorist and artist, who said that the only grace you can have is the grace that you can imagine. And I loved what Dara said about something important, something great, something unique is upon us. And I'm going to participate in the talk about if heroism is declining. So it's around that I want to ask you a question, and it's around your notion of neutrality. It's a both and question. I understand neutrality to be vitally important, right? So I'm trying to build upon what you're saying, not dismissing what you're saying, if that makes sense. And as we know, any notion of heroism is very cultural. There may be some universal with a little u, but it's also very cultural. And now I'm thinking of Dante's The Divine Comedy, which your work made me think of in terms of allowing me to see the stars again. So I really appreciate that. And notice I didn't say but, and it is also Dante in the Divine Comedy who had a special disdain for those who remain neutral, particularly in important kinds of time. It's so important, although some people misquote Dante, the Longfellow, Frederick Douglass, and even recently, Gavin Newsom had talked about the problems with neutrality in times of moral distress, which I think is occurring right now. So much so, that as many of you may know, that there are people who are defining what happened on January 6th in terms of the White House as being heroic, okay? I really don't care about your politics, it's just that it's being defined that way. And so that's why I'm concerned about the notion of neutrality. And as earlier, someone, I think it was well brought up, the notion of Maria Tatar and her and the heroine with 1,000 faces, which I've also been reading along with your book. And she asks, and she posits that maybe we need to redefine what heroism is or what makes one a hero. And what she talks about is those mothers and women who have flown underneath the underground, performing stealth operations and quietly seeking justice, righting wrongs, and repairing the fraying edges of the social fabric, are simply struggling to survive or to thrive. So maybe in terms of ones we become elders, the notion of neutrality in some instances are really useful, but in others, as elders or as we need to redefine heroism or heroism and to think about it as actually helping those who are following behind us with the kinds of stealth operations that will make us all more free. So could you talk a little more about your notion of neutrality and where what I'm talking about is part of it, or do I have it wrong?
I don't recall using the word neutrality. What I recall is that I'm describing the 3 steps of a rite of passage: letting go, stepping into the neutral zone, and emerging renewed.
Mm-hmm.
And the neutral zone is what we, in the Jungian world call liminality, the time between identities, between roles, between known realities. So I certainly didn't use the term neutrality to advocate political neutrality or moral neutrality. Not my intention at all. It was more looking at there's a moment that may be quick or may endure in any rite of passage, in any transition that we undergo, in which we're, letting go of the trapeze behind us and not yet grabbed onto the trapeze in front of us. And we don't know if there's a net beneath us. And that's the neutral zone. And so in the transition from, and what I mean by heroic in the sense is our midlife empire building stage of life, building careers, building families, building financial stability. That's what I was referring to, is that stage of life. And that as we transition out of that for all kinds of reasons, whether by choice or not by choice, there are moments or years when, we're between trapezes, or we're like the chrysalis in the cocoon, and we don't know what's on the other side of it. It's an internal process. It's not a neutral position or belief. I don't believe for a minute that we should be neutral about politics these days. So that's not what I'm saying.
No, I very much understand the cycle, liminality, et cetera, et cetera. But what I am getting at is that typically when we talk about the stage of the elderly, you even mentioned of going from action to the internal. And what I'm arguing is once we do that, in certain cultures and in certain situations, one must again enter out of the internal and actually enter into the world, but it may be what you're transmitting, et cetera, et cetera. So
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying.
I mean, there are people who are very introverted who will naturally gravitate at this time of life toward solitary contemplation and self-reflection, and may not come out into the world. But I think most people long to serve and contribute in this stage of life. And even if it's just grandparenting, but some on a larger scale. But the point that I'm making is that we do that now with a different state of mind or quality of awareness. We do it now as an elder with, and that's like a long conversation about that state of mind and what I mean by that. So in other words, I'm not going to engage politically today the way that I did at Berkeley in my 20s. I'm not the same person. I'm not going to be fueled by the same projections that I was in those days and the same right and wrong thinking. I think maybe the language got confused, Vorris. I hope that clarifies it a bit.
It's fine. I definitely understand what you're going with that. And I'm again trying to build upon that. So I understand completely.
Okay.
Thanks, Connie.
There's
Thanks.
another a piece of this that's coming to my mind. I'm thinking about the fact that, you know, the idea of karma and this idea that moksha is to have zero karma, not good karma, no karma. And karma is very much about our intentionality towards the world. And so as we become enlightened beings, we reduce this intentionality. But when I make sense of that, I think of it as more like the willfulness. And I think of the willfulness as that coming from that egoic effort to control and to make the world, you know, what you're trying to make of it. And so when I think of moksha, when I think of karma, I think maybe something like this type of neutrality, right? This karmic neutrality where I'm not trying to impose my will and grip. But it doesn't mean, and this is, I think, a really important thing about moksha. You know, if you've achieved moksha, it doesn't mean you no longer wish well for the world. It doesn't mean you no longer will do anything for the world. It means that your effort, your movement towards the world is no longer this gripping control that's coming from the ego, trying to make it into what you want it to be. And I wonder if that maybe is partially what you guys are, you know, it relates to what you two are talking about.
Yeah, very much so. The ego's agenda, you know, if the ego doesn't get humbled later in life, then there's no room for the self or the soul or whatever we call it, spirit, to move forward to the front burner. And so we're continuing to generate karma by our actions then.
You said that Jung line, right? That you experience the self upon the defeat of the ego.
Yes,
Yeah.
and again, all of that makes sense. It's about understanding for me, not, you know, trying to be right. What I would add to this, though, is that you have groups of people, and again, in Tata Butchie refers to that, women, due to gender, due to race, due to sexual orientation, whatever, who have been told all their lives to deny their egos, that they have no agency in the world, and they resist
Yes.
that. And so how do they hear these kind of conversations? That's all I'm getting at, right? And again, that comes off, it resonates differently. And that's why I said there's heroism, which I believe, and I believe in universal wisdom, but we're just a small u, that's all.
Difficult to transcend the ego if we don't have an opportunity to develop one.
You know,
Thanks,
it's really a trip. I teach students like hero's journey stuff, right? And the hero's journey, as Campbell would say, is really, it's kind of, well, he wouldn't say it's modeled after individuation, but we kind of know it is. But what he says is that Freud is focused on the rising from sunrise to the zenith of life, and that Jung is focused on what happens after the zenith of life. You know, and so here I am trying to teach something like the hero's journey, which is modeled around starting at the zenith. And these are students that are still on the rise. And there has been some conflict around these students trying to deconstruct their own egos at a moment where really they kind of, you know, it's okay time to build up that pride at least.
Ken Wilber called this spiritual bypass. He wrote brilliantly about it.
By the way, I do hope you guys noticed that, you know, this isn't Connie's first event with us. So we've shared a couple links, the conversation that she had with Zaman on Rumi, the salon she did when we were first getting these salons online on Shadow. So those are available. I hope that you guys will check those out. Connie, do you want to make any special invitation to your upcoming event, or maybe notes on where it's going to go, unless somebody wants to jump in at the last second?
Well, Pacifica has so graciously offered to hold a symposium on the inner work of age. Dennis will be there doing Aging as a Hero's Journey, I believe. And Thomas Moore will be there. Chris Downing will be teaching. John Beebe, Clyde Ford will be teaching, who's in our audience. And Lionel Corbett, and several spiritual teachers from different traditions. And so it's a 3-day event, and we would love to have you. It's November 12th, 13th, 14th. Thank you, Myth Salon. Thank you, friends and panelists. This was really lovely. And I'm grateful.
Thank you, Connie. I'd like to say one thing that I've observed about, if I will, our generation, is that I believe that we really started out as a very courageous post-World War II generation who kind of were guided by this delusion that we could make our lives be anything we wanted them to be. And I think that as elders now, servicing a younger community of millennials below us or around us, that they have been infused by that same spirit of trying to make the world a better place and find in the process who it is that they actually are. So instead of achieving, which I think was it was sort of the role that I grew up with, that I rebelled against, was the whole idea of success being something outside of myself. And this, for me, has always been a kind of a life mission to articulate what is my true nature, what is myself, who am I in this world. And so, as someone who has kind of walked that walk for more than a half a century, since I was a young 20-something, I feel humbled by the whole process, but it's still in our generation. This is our cultural DNA that we're swimming in. And I look at both of my sons, I look at the younger people in it. I didn't get this from the world I grew up with. And so I'm grateful that they see value in what it is that we have become and are taking out with us. I think we've been a very courageous generation. And if not, we haven't been as steeped, I think, in materiality and in the whole guided by profit mantra. But I think that, I hope that we have been a good model for those who we've raised and who are fulfilling the next part of it, because nothing lasts forever. And we're, some of us are going out, as the sands drip into the bottom of the hourglass.
Yeah, I just want to say, on that note you're given, of course, the generation is seeing incredible transformation of human life in incredibly positive ways, and gosh, we still need your help on this climate issue. And it is a profound moment for us to work together across generations. Doing it within my own family, even. It's very, very profound. And the last thing I just want to say is I just want to say one quick shout out and hello to the version of me that's going to watch this in 40 years and seek the wisdom that's been shared tonight. So hi, thanks everybody.
It's beautiful, Will. And I am, I'm so honored that the first time I brought up this Myth Salon idea to you downtown at the building that I hope not to go to very often, you said yes. What if you had a reservation? What if you had said, well, what's in it for me? But we did this, and now it's a monthly thing, and it's beautiful. It vitalizes people's lives. We got the comments. It's a cool thing. So I'd like to go out quietly, humbly, if you will. One more singing bowl, and just, oh, I like that candle. Will, this could be permanent. All right, here we go. Oh, thank you, everyone. A beautiful evening. Connie, thank you so much. Panelists, Selina, Dennis, Rick, Dara, Zaman, Vorris.
Thanks, Connie.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you
everyone.
Great
all.
presentation.
Thank
Great
you
evening
all.
to all of you.